Welcome to the Real Happy Mom podcast. I'm your host, Tony Ann, the blogger and content creator at Real Happy Mom, where moms can find encouragement and practical tips for this journey called motherhood. Also have this podcast to introduce you to other moms from various walks of life. And today on episode number 28, I'll be talking to Megan. She'll be opening up about her story about losing a child, as well as how we can support our friends and family members who are suffering with grief and loss. Before we jump into this episode of the podcast, I just wanted to do a shout out to Chaya, who left a review on iTunes. She said it's easy to get caught up in the responsibilities of motherhood, work, and life, and never stop to focus on refilling your own cup in a way that really helps you mentally, emotionally, and physically. Real Happy Mom podcast connects you with ideas and experts who offer ways of doing more for yourself than just taking a spa day every now and then. Keeping her podcast in my queue gives me a reminder I need to keep returning to what matters most and refueling in a meaningful way that allows me to be more present for my family and my life. Love Real Happy Mom and Tony Ann's soothing, no-nonsense voice. And Chaya, I love you, and thank you for that awesome review. Now make sure you head over to iTunes and leave a review and also hit subscribe so that you can be featured on the next episode. Now let's jump in to episode number 28 with Megan. So today I have Megan, and I am excited to have her on today. So welcome to the podcast, Megan.
Thank
Now,
you.
Megan, before we jump into our topic for today, I just wanted you to just briefly give us a little bit about you and about what you're up to right now.
I am a mom of 5, and I am home taking care of the 4 that I have here. I live with my husband of 8 years in Minnesota, and I'm homeschooling mom. I love to visit people. My faith is very important to me. I love to learn new things, be with people, travel, enjoy
Yes, to
life.
that, Megan. Now, Megan, you mentioned you have your mother of 5, but you have 4 with
hmm
you now. So I just wanted you to give us a little bit of background on your story about loss and grief, if you don't mind sharing that with us.
Yeah, I sure can do that. Um, so we have 5 children. We have 3 boys and 2 girls. And when we had 3 kids, and I was pregnant for our 4th, and she was due in 4 weeks, I went to check on my daughter, my 15-month-old Aria, and I found her after she had passed away in the night. And so that began my road down grief and loss and trying to figure out how to live with a child who is gone. I guess it brought a lot of things up for me. Grief is really a hard road and very crazy because they're very foreign emotions and you don't understand what's going on, and a lot of crazy things happen to you that you don't get. And I also got PTSD from finding her. So that was just another, and then along with my other daughter being born 4 weeks later. So just kind of a tough road, but now I'm sharing my story and hoping to help others learn how to live with the grief. So that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Megan, I know that that is something that is pretty difficult, even just for me to listen. So I commend you for your strength in being able to talk to us
Mm.
about that today. So, Megan, how are you able to recover from this heartbreaking loss and then also be able to support your other young children during this time?
Yes, I knew as soon as Arya died that I could not do this alone, that I needed help and I needed to seek help professionally and allow the people in my life to help me. And so I went to therapy. I spent many, many, many hours there. And from my first therapist, that's when I found out that I had PTSD. And so she sent me to another one where I began a therapy doing EMDR. It's eye movement and desensitization reprocessing. It's a therapy that helps basically bring down the symptoms of PTSD from a really high level to where I am now today, which is about like maybe a 2 or 3. Like I still live with that trauma, but it's definitely on a livable scale. Like I can manage day to day with it. But I spent many, many, many hours in that therapy sessions. I don't even know how many hours, which I'm thankful for all the people I had in my life who helped me get my kids to babysitting and stuff. So I did that, and then the support of people in my life, allowing people to help, being vulnerable and allowing the emotions of grief to be there and facing them head on. I guess grief brings on so much crazy, crazy emotions, and you feel really alone because you don't know what's going on with you. You can feel so many things that make you feel guilty or angry, and you have no idea, but like why or what's happening, or you're going crazy. And I learned through my therapy and through visiting with other moms that this was normal, and it's a part of grief, and it's a part of learning how to live with grief and learning to work through those emotions and allow them to be and process them, and that we can eventually let them go. You just keep facing them and keep working through them, and it's hard. It's a hard, it never fully leaves. It will always be with me. And I think what has changed, once you work through all the stuff, is that I don't want the grief to go away, really, because it is a reminder to me of my love for Arya and that I will never forget her. And with my children, they were 2 and 4, I think, when she died.
Okay.
And they saw her, and it was really traumatic for them. So they went to therapy a lot too. There's a thing called play therapy, so they just play with their therapist, and the therapist watches their behaviors and what comes up, and just kind of doesn't really interfere a ton, but she watches and sees what's going on, because that's how kids get out their trauma and grief, is through play. So that's what we did.
Okay. Now, I know as a mom, it definitely difficult, but you mentioned that your kids at the time were 2 and 4, so they were pretty young. And I know a lot of times you hear
Mhm.
people say like, oh, like kids, they get over things a lot quicker and easier than for adults. Did you find that that was true for your kids?
I think kids are really resilient. It is true. They are very they would be like, "Oh yeah, Arya died," and then they move on. Like the way they talk was like, it's very hard sometimes as a parent to hear. But in the other way, it's a blessing that they don't feel that extent of grief and pain that we do, but it doesn't mean that they are not grieving. They don't have trauma. I still notice things in, especially my older son, that he has moments of fear around kids sleeping
Mm,
or worry about his younger siblings. So I can see that trauma in him, but I think allowing them to process and allowing the open conversation and talking about what happened, and whenever they bring it up, to be there and listen. And there was nothing that couldn't be talked about. If my son or both of my sons brought up anything, or if they ever talk about Arya, we we are open to talking about it, talking about her and talking about what happened. And I think the hardest thing we can do for them is to ignore it and to tell them to just like maybe get over it or not want to talk about
mhm.
it. Kids at that age, they take it to themselves that it was their fault and it's their problem, and what happened is their fault. So I think it's important to talk about it and work through it with them and make sure that they understand that what happened was not their fault and it wasn't their issue and they didn't do anything wrong, but that sometimes that happens and we don't know why or understand why, but to work through the emotions of that.
Now, Megan, how are you able to find pretty much just find hope and find the light in all of this? Because this, I can imagine, was a very dark time for you. So, how are you able to find hope and light in all of this?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest things have been support of my friends and family and my faith, and then just working through my emotions and not being scared to feel pain. It's painful. It is really, really hard. I think it's the hardest, well, it is the hardest thing that I have ever experienced as a mom and then as a couple. But facing those emotions and allowing them to be, and knowing that grief is our normal response to the loss of our child and loved one, that it's okay to be there, that you're not going crazy. I think just being validated in all those emotions and thoughts and knowing that you're not alone is super helpful. And so facing all those emotions, I feel like now my waves of grief, where when they were so close together and hit so hard, now they're further apart. And when they come, I know that I can get up again. I know that those waves will be there the rest of my life, but I know that it's possible to have joy. I know that it's possible to have joy amidst the grief. It doesn't mean the grief goes away, but that they can live together in the same life and I can still have a beautiful life. It's hard to say how because it's different for everybody, but for me, it's just been trying to work through the emotions and not thinking that what I'm feeling is like it can't be felt. And I think it's really important to feel those. And when I feel them and allow them to be, I'm able to process and let go of them. So I think my brain over time and my heart have learned to accept it and even find reasons to the person I've become, I've changed to such a different person, and I'm really thankful for that. Like, I wouldn't want to bring back the person I was, the things I didn't understand, and the things that I didn't get before loss. I don't want to be that person again, but of course, I would take Aria back in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
But the things I have learned about myself, about people, about life, that life isn't just only happy things. Like, I know we all want to just be happy and only have good things, but those painful and hard moments are also beautiful in a way. And when we can be raw and beautiful and vulnerable with ourselves and with other people, it creates such deeper connections. It's possible to live with and find hope. It lives together. You can have grief and joy possible in your life, and it's beautiful. It's okay that it's that way.
Just help me to understand how someone going through that would feel. But I just want to step on the other side and just have you give us some tips on how, if we have a friend or a family member who's going through something similar that you've gone through, how can we support them during a time of grief and loss of a child?
Yes, that is a question I've been getting asked a lot. I think the biggest thing to remember is we always want to fix something. We always, there's something, somebody has pain and a hard time, and we want to fix it. We want to help them. And there is just no fixing what has happened. There's nothing any of us can do, even as myself, a grieving mom. There's nothing I can do or say to fix the so called problem because it's not. There is nothing we can do about
Mhm.
that. And I think the biggest thing is just being there and listening to them. Sometimes you have to talk about your story thousands of times. Like it might be many, many times that, and other people might think, seriously, can you just like get over it? And you know what? It is hard. You don't just get over it. I think not fixing what's going on with them, but allowing them to express what they're feeling and what they're thinking without judgment and just validating them and speaking their experience back to them and saying that, yeah, that's really hard. Like it is so powerful to just be with somebody and not try to fix their pain because the pain is there. And I think it helps a lot to just have somebody who's compassionate and who listens and lets you feel. And if you tell, like, there's a lot of feelings that come up that people I think are scared of, like anger
Mhm.
and guilt, and all those feelings not only scare the griever, but I think they scare the people who are trying to support them. And those feelings are very normal with grief. And it's important to, if somebody is feeling guilt or anger, to not be like, don't feel guilty or don't feel angry. That doesn't help them let go of that grief or anger or guilt or anger. It just tells them that you're not listening and they're not validated in their feelings. So when you can be there and help them work through it and talk about it and let them talk about feeling guilty, and because I've never talked to a mom who has not felt guilt about some way or some form of their child's death. It's just very, we all have a deep feeling of like we're responsible for them. So just being present and allowing them to express their emotions, checking in on them. Another thing is not saying, like, let me know if I can do anything for you, because that doesn't really help. And as a grieving mom, your brain is so in a fog and fried that you can't even think of what do you need. It's hard to even come up with something. If you can think of something that you yourself can give freely, because on another note, that it's really difficult to take something from somebody that they're not giving freely. Like when you're on the receiving end of help and gifts, it's already hard enough to be getting so much help. And then when somebody, you can tell that they don't really want to help,
Mhm.
it's hard. So give from your heart and give something, maybe give 3 ideas that you can give. Like, okay, so this week I can bring food on Tuesday, or I could watch your kids, and so you could you and your husband could go on a date, or I could watch your kids so you could go to the cemetery. Like whatever those 3 things or whatever they are that you can help, give them those options and say, let me know if any of them work for you and I will be happy to do them. Something like that, instead of just saying, "Oh, let me know how you could help, how I
Mhm.
could help," because that's not very helpful, and usually you don't end up helping. So,
Yeah. Now, you
uh,
mentioned a couple of things about what not to say, and I wanted to go through some of those because I know the big one is oh, call me if you need anything. Let me know how I can help you because I feel like
yeah,
that's an easy way out because you know they're not going to call you.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, totally. It's hard to reach out when you are in such a hard and dark place. It's hard to reach out for help. It's important to reach out and, as a supporter, and ask how they're doing and what I can do today, or give, your options that you can do. Things not to say. It's hard to say what to not say, because we all grieve differently. And so one thing that might be offensive to somebody
Mhm.
else might not be offensive to another person, and it might depend on the moment of grief, because it is just a minute by minute changes. I think it's anything that you're trying to fix it, like anything that where you're trying to change the situation, is not helpful. Anything that starts with at least,
Ooh,
like
that's a good one.
at least you had her for 15 months, or at least you, whatever, and then I think there's a lot of things that are trying to be supportive, especially amongst like faith. If you have a faith, that God knows best and that God needed her more than you. And I think as a mom, it's really hard to hear that, because you feel like there's no better place than for your child to be with
Mhm.
you. And it doesn't mean that you don't believe that at some point, eventually maybe you can come to terms or believe that again. But all those things that are meant to be supportive, they don't really help in that moment of really dark despair. And maybe some people they do help. I just know a lot of people who it doesn't help. So I think it's just good to remember that basically anything you say is not, you cannot change the situation. So don't try to fix the problem. Don't try to make their pain go away, because you
Mhm.
can't. Just be there and support, and there's not one way. And then the other thing I've thought about is to not be scared. It's scary when I say all this stuff to, you could say the wrong
Yeah.
thing, whatever, to like, people just want to stop and do nothing. And I think that's one of the worst things you can do, is do nothing, because when you're in this really, really dark place, in the moment that you need the support and friends the most, then people tend to run away because they're too scared and nervous, and they don't know how to deal with grief, and they feel awkward. And this person, this mother who has lost her child, needs that support the most right now. Don't be afraid to do the wrong thing. That's one of the biggest things. Like, we all make mistakes, we all mess up. Even as myself, a grieving mom, I get nervous and scared, and what to do, what to say, just because you really don't want to do more harm. You know that they're in pain, and you don't want to make it worse. And there just is nothing worse than just disappearing. It You really need to at least show your love and support, and don't be too afraid to reach out and to talk to them.
Yes. Now, you mentioned a couple of things, and it made me think about some things because I know for me, it's hard because I'm one of those people, I don't want to say the wrong thing. So I'm one of the ones that's like asking, like,
Yeah.
should I say this? Should I say not say that? Now, I just want to
Yeah.
know, like, would you find it helpful, or do you think that it would be helpful for grieving moms to just have someone physically there, even if they're not saying anything, having someone physically there is that more helpful than, like you said, just even if they say nothing?
I think it totally depends on the person. I was around people a lot. I had a hard time being by myself, but then I would go in periods where I would get my depression and I didn't want to see anybody, so I stayed home for a long
Mhm,
time. But I went in spurts of that and I started to understand myself. So I think it's really, really important to communicate with that grieving mom and be like, I would love to come sit with you. And I think that is a beautiful thing to go sit with somebody. I think it's one of the most honoring things you can do with somebody else is to sit with them in their pain. But not everybody wants that.
mhm,
Not every grieving mom is the same. So it's very important throughout all of this to communicate with them. Like, does this help you? Not in like a badgering way and like trying to bug them and get things out of them, but to communicate and check in and be like, hey, is this helpful if I just come sit with you? And feel free to say, I don't know what to say and I don't know what to say because I don't want to say the wrong thing and I know you're in a lot of pain and I just want to be here for you. I care for you and then can I just sit with you? Like something like that. Just it totally depends on the person, so it's hard to, give a one yes or no answer for that.
mhm. Yeah. No, what you just said was just beautiful. Like I love that. I could definitely say that. So thank you for giving
Yeah,
me some tips and giving moms tips too, because we
yeah,
want to be there to support our friends and family members, but some of us just don't know how to do it without, being offensive or saying the wrong thing or just kind of
yeah,
making things kind of spiral out of control even more. So I really appreciate you
yeah,
giving us some tips on that and giving us some things on what we could say and what not to say, of course, too as well, because
yeah,
um, even though I haven't gone through that, I can only imagine how I would feel if someone said, some of those things that you mentioned. So it definitely put things into
yeah.
perspective for me. So thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for letting me talk about it because I think even so letting moms know that they're not alone with their grief, but also people who are in the supporting role, it is it's hard for everybody. We're all learning when it happens, when you're supporting and when you're grieving. And I think the education about grief it's a hard, heavy subject. A lot of people run away from it, but it is so important to talk about so we can learn and work at getting better at how to support each other when that happens because it will happen to all of us. All of us will grieve in some way. Not all of us will lose our child or children, but all of us will have grief in our life. And so if we can learn about it and know how to face it and it's an important topic.
Yes, I agree. Now, Megan, you shared a lot of information with us, and I'm sure there's some moms out there that would like to learn more and hear more about your story and just learn more about the whole grieving process too. But I just want to know where we can find you on social media and find you online if we want to learn more about you.
Yeah, they can go to my website is meganhillica.com. I do blog posts every week. I have an Instagram at Cultivated Family and Facebook. I have Cultivated Family page and I also have a Facebook group for grieving moms. It's called Living with Grief with Megan Hillica, Child Loss with Megan Hillica. So you can join me on either any of those platforms and I would love to have you join me.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to include all of that in the show notes. So make sure you check those out there. Now, Megan, before we sign off, one of my favorite questions to ask all of my guests is if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one, and I think because I've learned so much about the different ways of people responding to loss or any situation in life, I just would love to, without having, like, just to look at somebody and know that, okay, you are somebody who cannot stand being asked a million questions, or you are somebody just to know who they are in like a very deep level and just be able to communicate with them on their terms and their way.
Cute.
That I would just love that.
That would be good. You could definitely get a lot more if you
Yeah.
had that superpower. I agree with that one.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, because it just fascinates me how different we all are in
Mhm.
every single person. And I mean, it's fascinating maybe because I don't understand it all. So if maybe if I did that, then it wouldn't be so fascinating. But I think it's amazing how we're all so different. And I would love to be able to communicate with people in the way they need.
Nice. Now,
So yeah,
I like that one. Megan, thank you again. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us.
yeah, thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Now that does it for this episode of the Real Happy Mom podcast. To find the links in the show notes, make sure you head over to realhappymom.com/28. There you'll find the links that Megan mentioned, as well as a few others that will help you with support of your friend or family member dealing with grief or loss. And do me a favor and head over to iTunes and make sure you hit subscribe, because I don't want you to miss the next episode that's coming up. Now that does it, and I'll catch you in the next one.